The letter arrived before breakfast, hidden beneath a folded linen napkin as if it were a sin. Yorkshire, 1817. At Harrowmere Hall, where every hinge shone, every silver spoon faced the proper direction, and every servant knew which secrets must be carried silently from room to room, Verity Wickliffe, Duchess of Norchester, sat alone beside the long window of her private sitting room and stared at the seal until the wax blurred. She knew the hand before she touched it. Mrs. Pike of Larkwell Village wrote with a firm, slanted script that had once comforted Verity through fevers, mourning clothes, and the lonely first months of marriage. No one at Harrowmere had summoned Mrs. Pike. No one at Harrowmere knew that Verity had written to her 3 days ago with trembling restraint, describing the faintness at chapel, the morning sickness she had hidden behind lavender water, and the strange, impossible hope that had begun to gather beneath her ribs. Now the answer lay in her lap. She could not open it at once. Beyond the window, the east drive curved toward the iron gate where mist still clung to the hedges. The estate looked peaceful from a distance, all pale stone, green lawns, and disciplined beauty, but Verity had learned that a house could be perfect and still unkind. She pressed her palm to the front of her gown, not dramatically, not even with certainty, but with the quiet fear of a woman who had been taught that joy was safest when no one else could see it. On the small table beside her lay an old brass key, darkened at the edges by age and touch. It did not belong with the painted porcelain and neat correspondence tray. It was too plain for a duchess. Too useful. Too honest. Verity closed her fingers around it before she broke the seal. Mrs. Pike had not wasted words. My dear Lady Verity, the signs you describe are not to be dismissed. If your dates are as you believe, then it is very likely you are with child. I beg you to take nourishment, avoid distress where you can, and send for me if there is pain, weakness, or any uncertainty. Until his grace is informed, be cautious in whom you trust. Verity read the sentence twice. With child. The room did not move, yet for one breath she felt as if Harrowmere had slipped away and left her standing in the rain 10 weeks earlier, beneath the arch of the east gate, with Adrian Wickliffe beside her and no witness but the night. He had come without announcement that evening. Parliament had kept him in London for weeks, and Lady Maud had told everyone he would not return before Easter. Yet near midnight, a low knock had sounded at the garden door of Verity's sitting room, and when she opened it, there he stood in a dark riding coat, rein in his hair, his expression worn thin by fatigue. Not the Duke of Norchester as society knew him. Not the man who could silence a county table with one lift of his brow. Only Adrian, cold from the road and looking at her as if he had walked too far through his own life and found, to his surprise, that she was still there. I didn't want the house woken, he had said. Lady Maud keeps enough account of my movements. Then you chose a poor door for secrecy, Verity had answered, because if she had spoken gently first, she might have wept. He had looked past her shoulder to the little brass key on her writing table. You still have the old gate key. Someone should have a way out, she said. His mouth had softened. Not a smile. Adrian rarely gave those freely. But something in him had paused, and the silence that followed had not been empty. That night had not repaired their marriage. One rain-soaked return could not undo 2 years of formal dinners, separate routines, and letters written more like estate memoranda than messages between husband and wife. Yet he had stayed until dawn in the sitting room, speaking with her in a low voice of debts, tenants, duty, loneliness, and the strange exhaustion of being born into a title before one was born into oneself. When he left through the east gate before the household stirred, Verity had watched him take the key from her hand, lock the gate behind him, and slide it back through the bars to her waiting palm. She had kept it ever since. Now that same key lay warm against her skin while Mrs. Pike's letter changed the shape of everything. A child. Perhaps Adrian's child. The heir Harrowmere wanted, though no one had wanted Verity herself. She rose too quickly, then steadied herself against the window frame. Her reflection stared back from the glass, pale but composed, dark hair pinned with care, grey morning gown plain enough to avoid comment, elegant enough to avoid pity. She had become an expert in such balances. A duchess must never look neglected, even when she was. A wife must never look lonely, even when the place beside her at dinner remained ceremonially empty. A woman must never look afraid, especially in a house governed by another woman's smile. The door opened after the lightest possible knock. Agnes, Verity's maid, entered with the tea tray and stopped just inside, her gaze falling to the broken seal. She was young, freckled, and loyal in the silent way servants became loyal when they had seen too much and said too little. "Your Grace, Lady Maud asks whether you will come down to the breakfast room." "Does she ask, Agnes?" Verity folded the letter once, carefully. "Or does she require?" Agnes lowered her eyes. "She said the household does poorly when its Duchess keeps irregular hours." Verity almost smiled. "Then we must protect the household from such ruin." She slipped Mrs. Pike's letter beneath the blotter on her writing desk and placed the old gate key over it without thinking. A childish hiding place, perhaps, but her hand chose it before her mind could object. Agnes noticed. Her face changed by the smallest degree. "Are you unwell, Your Grace?" For one dangerous moment, Verity wanted to tell her. She wanted to say the words aloud and make them real in another human heart. Instead, she drew her shawl around her shoulders. "A little tired. Nothing more. Shall I send for broth?" "Not yet." Verity moved toward the door, then stopped. "Agnes." "Yes, Your Grace." "If anyone asks whether a letter arrived this morning, you may say the post brought household accounts." Agnes understood enough to look frightened. "Yes, Your Grace." The breakfast room at Harrowmere faced south, where sunlight turned the polished table into a river of gold. Lady Maud Wickliffe sat at its head as if the chair had been made from her bones. She was not the Dowager Duchess. She had never held that rank. She was Adrian's widowed aunt, installed years ago to manage the orphaned Felix and the female side of the household after the late Duchess's death. Yet rank did not always decide power inside a house. Habit did. Fear did. Lady Maud wore mourning lavender and a face of refined concern, both chosen to suggest sacrifice. Beside her chair, 7-year-old Felix Wickliffe stood with a primer tucked under his arm, waiting for permission to leave. He looked at Verity the instant she entered, and the tightness in his small shoulders eased. That, more than any courtesy title, was the one kindness Harrowmere had given her. The boy had decided early that Verity was safe. No one had told him to. "Good morning, Aunt Maud," Verity said. She kissed Felix lightly on the crown of his fair head. "Good morning, my dear." Felix whispered, "You look tired." Lady Maud's teacup touched its saucer with a clean, hard sound. Children notice what adults are too polite to mention. Verity took her place halfway down the table, the Duchess's place in theory, though Lady Maud had arranged the household for so long that even the footman looked to her first. Then we are fortunate children have not yet learned cruelty and called it manners. Felix's eyes widened. Lady Maud smiled. Sharpness before breakfast is rarely a sign of health. Nor is constant supervision, Verity said softly. It was not wise. She knew that as soon as the words left her. But the letter beneath the old brass key seemed to beat like a second pulse in the room above them, and for the first time in weeks, Verity felt not weak but fiercely awake. Lady Maud studied her over the rim of her cup. "I hope you are not overtiring yourself with unnecessary correspondence. Women in your position often seek comfort in little dramas when nature has denied them larger duties." The footman near the sideboard went still. Felix looked down at his shoes. Verity placed her napkin in her lap with hands that did not shake. "My position, Lady Maud, is Duchess of Norchester." "A title is a vessel," Lady Maud replied. "It is useful only when filled." Silence settled across the room. Not loud silence. Harrowmere specialized in the quiet kind, the kind that taught servants where to look and children when not to breathe. Verity felt the words strike where Lady Maud intended them to strike, against the locked chamber of fear that had lived inside her since her wedding. No heir. No claim on Adrian's tenderness. No place in the house except the one etiquette forced them to give her. She could have answered with the letter. She could have lifted her chin and changed the future of the room with 4 words. "I am with child." But something in Lady Maud's gaze warned her. It was too watchful. Too hungry for a reaction. So Verity reached for the teapot instead and poured with perfect grace. "Then I shall try to be useful." Felix made a small sound of protest, quickly swallowed. Lady Maud noticed that too. She noticed everything that might be used later. Your devotion to humility does you credit, she said. His Grace values order above sentiment. It is one of his finest qualities. Verity looked toward the empty chair at the far end of the table, where Adrian sat when he was home. The carved ducal crest caught the light. A lion, a gate, a motto in Latin that promised steadfast honor. She wondered what Adrian would say if he knew. She wondered whether he would believe her joy, or examine it like an account placed before him for correction. When breakfast ended, Felix caught her hand near the door. "Will you walk by the east gate later?" he asked. "Perhaps," Verity said. "Why?" He glanced toward Lady Maud, then back at her. "It opens better for you." The sentence was childish, but it lodged in her heart. She squeezed his fingers once before releasing him to his tutor. When Verity returned to her sitting room, the air felt different before she crossed the threshold. The blotter on her writing desk had been shifted. Only an inch, perhaps less. The old brass gate key remained where she had left it, but it no longer sat straight. Verity went cold. She lifted it. Mrs. Pike's letter was still there. Folded. Silent. Exposed by the faintest change. Behind her, from the corridor, Lady Maud's voice floated through the half-open door, smooth as cream and sharp as a blade. "My dear Verity, I do hope the Morning Post brought nothing troubling." Verity did not move the letter. For one measured breath, she stood with Mrs. Pike's folded page beneath her fingers and Lady Maud's voice behind her, sweet enough to make accusation sound like concern. The sitting room had never seemed smaller. The fire had burned low. The old brass key lay beside the blotter, tilted at an angle no careful hand of hers would have left. Lady Maud stepped inside without waiting to be invited. She wore the same mild expression she had worn at breakfast, but her eyes went first to the desk, then to Verity's face, then to the letter as if she had already read every hidden word upon it. "You look pale, my dear," she said. "I hope you have not received distressing news." Verity folded the letter once more and slipped it into the inner pocket of her work basket, beneath a square of embroidery she had not touched in weeks. "It is only a note from Larkwell." "From whom?" "An old acquaintance of my family." "How charming." Old acquaintances often remember what newer ones have not been told. Verity turned then. "If you have a question, Lady Maud, you may ask it plainly." "Plainness is a virtue in the lower ranks," Lady Maud said, glancing toward the door where Agnes hovered in anxious silence. "In families such as ours, discretion is kinder." "Kinder to whom?" The older woman smiled. "To everyone who must live with consequences." Before Verity could answer, the sound came from below. Wheels on gravel. A hard halt before the front steps. A man's voice giving orders with clipped precision. Harrowmere changed around the sound. Doors opened. Servants crossed the corridor more quickly than they had all morning. Somewhere in the entrance hall, the butler spoke in a tone reserved for only one person. His Grace had returned. Verity felt the key press cold against her palm before she realized she had picked it up. Adrian was not expected for 4 more days. Lady Maud's face did not change, but the satisfaction in her stillness was worse than surprise. "How fortunate," she murmured. "His Grace has arrived in time to settle any confusion." Verity slipped the key into her pocket with Mrs. Pike's letter and went down at once, because to remain upstairs would look like fear, and she had already given Lady Maud too much of that. Adrian Wickliffe stood in the entrance hall with rain-darkened shoulders, travel dust on his boots, and a sealed packet of London papers under one arm. He looked as he always did after Parliament, carved down to bone and duty. His dark hair was damp at the temples. His jaw carried the tightness of a man who had spent many hours hearing fools speak and had not been free to silence them. Yet when he saw Verity on the stair, something crossed his face too quickly to name. Recognition. Weariness. The memory of rain. It vanished when Lady Maud descended behind her. "Your Grace," Verity said, pausing 3 steps from the bottom. "We did not expect you today." "The debate ended sooner than expected," Adrian replied. His voice was low. "Controlled. And there are estate accounts that cannot be delayed." Lady Maud came to stand beside the newel post. "Nor other matters, perhaps." Adrian's gaze shifted to her. What matters? The hall quieted. Not empty quiet. Listening quiet. The kind a great house made when servants became furniture and furniture learned to breathe. Verity saw Agnes at the edge of the passage, white-faced. She saw Felix at the schoolroom door, held back by his tutor's careful hand. She saw Lady Maud lift one gloved hand to her throat as if the burden of speech pained her. "I would rather not speak here," Lady Maud said. "Then do not begin here," Verity answered. Adrian looked back to her, and the brief softness was gone. Verity. Only her name. Not a warning, not a plea. Yet the way he said it reminded her that this house bent toward his voice. Lady Maud lowered her eyes. "A letter has been found." "What letter?" Adrian asked. "One that ought never to have been written to her grace. Or by her." The heir left the hall. Verity felt it go. Adrian did not look away from Lady Maud, but his expression became still in the dangerous way that always came before judgment. "Where?" "In her grace's chamber," Lady Maud said. "Beneath her pillow. Mrs. Vale discovered it while changing the linens. I took it only to spare the maids further distress." Verity stared at her. "That is a lie." The word struck the marble floor harder than a dropped glass. Lady Maud's brows lifted with delicate sorrow. "My dear, don't make this worse." Adrian held out his hand. "Give it to me." Lady Maud produced the letter from the folds of her shawl. Not Mrs. Pike's letter. This paper was larger, scented faintly, sealed and broken, the creases handled enough to seem discovered rather than planted. Adrian unfolded it. Verity watched his eyes move across the page. Once. Twice. A muscle tightened in his cheek. "Captain Roland Fane," he said. The name meant almost nothing to her. A cavalry officer who had dined twice at Harrowmere the previous winter. A handsome talker with more compliments than sense, now stationed somewhere near the coast. "I have had no correspondence with Captain Fane," Verity said. Adrian read aloud, not loudly, but every word carried. "My dearest Verity, I cannot forget the hour stolen beneath your husband's roof. If the child is indeed to come, you must trust that I will not abandon you." Felix made a small sound from the schoolroom door before his tutor drew him back. Verity gripped the banister. The hall tilted, then steadied. "I did not write that. He did not write that to me." "The hand is masculine," Lady Maud said. "The sentiment is unmistakable." Verity looked only at Adrian. "It is false." "Are you with child?" he asked. No tenderness. No wonder. Only the question, cold and placed like a blade between them. The truth had been meant for another hour, another room, perhaps another version of her husband. But lies had dragged it into the hall. Verity lifted her chin. "Yes." Adrian's face changed. "Not much." "Enough." For an instant he looked struck, as if hope had reached him before suspicion seized it by the throat. Then Lady Maud spoke softly. "His Grace has not been at Harrowmere for nearly 3 months. The household ledger is quite clear." Verity turned to her. "He was here 10 weeks ago." "Was he?" Lady Maud's voice remained gentle. "No carriage was logged. No servant admitted him. No room was prepared. No one saw him." Adrian's eyes met Verity's. Something passed there. A memory trying to stand against written record. The rain. The east gate. The key sliding through the bars into her palm. She saw him remember. She also saw him doubt the memory because no one else had been allowed to keep it. "You came through the east gate," she said. "You knocked at my sitting room door near midnight." Lady Maud inhaled sharply, as if wounded by impropriety. "Verity." Adrian folded the letter with terrible care. "Why was this not told to the house?" "Because you asked not to wake it." "And no one saw me." "Not that I know." "How convenient," Lady Maud whispered. Verity looked at her husband and felt the first true crack open inside her. "You know it happened." Adrian's hand closed around the forged letter. "I know I rode through Yorkshire roads that night after leaving London. I know I was exhausted. I know I had no wish to disturb the house. He paused. I do not know why the ledger shows no entry. Because someone altered it. Perhaps. That single word hurt more than anger. Perhaps. Not yes. Not I believe you. Not my wife would not lie. Lady Maud stepped nearer. For the sake of the family, this must be contained. Adrian's gaze hardened, but it did not turn toward his aunt. It turned inward, toward duty, reputation, bloodline, scandal, all the invisible gods Harrowmere served. Verity, you will go to Larkwell Lodge until I have examined this matter. The hall became soundless. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. Go, she repeated. For your comfort and for the dignity of the house. Do not dress it in velvet. Her voice did not rise. You are sending me away. Adrian flinched, but only in the eyes. You will have Agnes. You will have a carriage, provisions, and whatever physician you require. I have not asked for a physician. Then ask. I asked for a husband to hear me. The word struck him. She saw that. She saw pain come and discipline bury it. Lady Maud looked down, hiding satisfaction in the shadow of her lashes. Adrian turned to the butler. Have the travelling carriage brought to the front. Her Grace will leave within the hour. Adrian, Verity said. It was the first time she had used his Christian name before the household. His face tightened. Do not. I will not beg. Her hands were cold, but they were steady. When truth comes, Your Grace, it will not find me begging. Lady Maud moved as if to comfort her. Verity stepped back. Do not touch me. A murmur trembled through the unseen servants and died at once. Adrian gave one sharp glance, and the house returned to stone. Within the hour, Verity descended the staircase in her cloak, with Agnes carrying one small valise behind her. No trunks. No proper farewell. No Duchess's procession. Only a wife removed quietly enough for society to be told a gentler lie. Felix stood halfway down the corridor, pale and rigid, his tutor's hand on his shoulder. Verity wanted to go to him, but Lady Maud stood between them like a closed door. Be brave, my dear, Lady Maud said. For all our sakes. Verity looked at Adrian one last time. He stood near the open front doors, rain-grey light behind him, the forged letter still in his hand. For a heartbeat, he seemed less like a duke than a man watching his own life take a turn he could neither stop nor admit he had chosen. But he said nothing. So Verity stepped into the carriage. The door closed. The wheels began to turn down the east drive. In her pocket, beneath Mrs. Pike's letter, the old brass key pressed against her palm like a secret that had not yet decided whether it would save her or condemn them all. Ahead, through the thinning mist, the iron gate came into view. It should have been open. It was not. The carriage stopped so suddenly that Agnes caught the side strap and Verity's gloved hand flew to the narrow ledge beneath the window. For one terrifying second, she thought the horses had shied. Then she heard the footman's startled voice, the scrape of gravel, and the gate porter speaking with the bewildered caution of a man caught between rank and disaster. Master Felix, you must step back. Verity leaned toward the window. The east gate stood 20 yards ahead, black iron rising between stone pillars beaded with rain. It was not merely shut. It was locked. Behind its bars, small and rigid in his dark schoolroom coat, stood Felix Wickliffe with both hands wrapped around the old brass gate key. His fair hair clung damply to his forehead. His chin trembled, but his feet did not move. He had placed himself safely behind the ironwork, not in the road, yet the effect was the same. No carriage could pass. No order could pretend it had not been challenged. Agnes whispered, "Oh, dear Lord." Verity's heart lurched so hard that for a moment she could not breathe. Felix should have been in the schoolroom. He should have been bent over Latin verbs under Mr. Pritchard's dry supervision, not standing in the rain with the whole weight of Harrowmere's cruelty in his small hands. The footman outside tried again. Master Felix, Her Grace must be allowed through. No, Felix said. His voice was thin, but it carried. She must be allowed back. Verity opened the carriage door before Agnes could stop her. The footman rushed forward, flustered, but Verity stepped down without taking his hand. The gravel was wet beneath her shoes. The cold air hit her face and cleared something in her that the hall had nearly smothered. "Felix," she said gently. "My dear, you must not stand in the rain." His eyes filled at the sound of her voice. "You were going away." "I was being sent to Larkwell Lodge." "That means away." The simplicity of it broke her more nearly than accusation had. She moved closer to the gate, though the iron still separated them. "Who gave you that key?" Felix looked down at his hands as if surprised to find it there. It was hanging in the little press near the pantry stairs. "The spare one." "Not yours." "The spare one." Verity's fingers closed over the key in her own pocket. For years, she had thought the east gate had only 2 keys, one kept by the porter, one forgotten in her sitting room. Another key meant another way through. Another unseen hand. "Felix," she said, lowering her voice, "why did you lock the gate?" "Because Aunt Maud said no one would believe me after you were gone." The words fell between them. Agnes gasped softly behind her. The gate porter went still. Verity felt the world narrow to the boy's pale face and the key clutched tight enough to whiten his knuckles. "Believe you about what?" she asked. Felix swallowed. "About the letter." From the house, hooves struck the gravel hard. Adrian was coming down the drive on foot beside the carriage path, his coat thrown over one arm, Lady Maud several paces behind him with Mr. Pritchard hurrying after her like a frightened crow. Adrian's expression was carved into command, but his gaze moved first to Verity, then to Felix, then to the locked gate. "Felix," he said, sharp enough to make the gate porter step back. "Open it." Felix flinched, but he did not turn the key. "No, sir." Adrian stopped. In all the years Verity had known him, she had seen men refuse him politely, foolishly, or with hidden resentment. She had never seen a child refuse him with tears in his eyes. "You are wet through," Adrian said, more controlled now. "You will make yourself ill." "Then call Mrs. Pike for me too," Felix answered. Lady Maud reached them, one hand pressed to her breast. "The child is overwrought. He has always been sensitive." Felix looked at her then, and whatever fear had bent him straightened into something clean and bright. "I'm not overwrought." Lady Maud's mouth tightened. "Felix, darling, this is not a game. Don't call me darling when you're angry." The gate porter looked at the ground. Adrian's eyes cut to Lady Maud, but she recovered at once. "You see what her Grace's indulgence has done. He thinks affection permits defiance." Verity took one step toward the gate. "Felix, look at me." He obeyed at once. "Tell only what you know." "Nothing more." He nodded. "I saw Aunt Maud last night." Lady Maud gave a breathless little laugh. "He saw me many times last night. I supervise his supper, his reading, his prayers." "Not then," Felix said. "Later. I couldn't sleep because of the wind. I went to the gallery to see if the lanterns were moving. Aunt Maud came out of her Grace's chamber. The rain seemed to grow quieter. Adrian's face altered by the smallest degree. "At what hour?" "After the long clock struck 11. Lady Maud's voice sharpened beneath its softness. "A child half asleep cannot read a clock." "I can read that one. It has a moon on the face." Felix lifted one hand from the key and pointed toward the house. She had a letter. Or paper. She folded it into her shawl. Her glove was torn here. He touched the side of his own finger. And she smelled of violets. Verity remembered the faint scent from breakfast, refined and sweet. Violet ink. Lady Maud had always preferred it for private notes, claiming black ink looked severe in a woman's hand. Adrian looked at his aunt. "Were you in her Grace's chamber last night?" Lady Maud held his gaze. "I entered briefly after dinner to see whether the fire had been properly laid. A household does not run on sentiment, Adrian. Someone must observe what others neglect. With a letter in your shawl." A child imagined that. "I'm not lying," Felix cried. The sound struck Verity harder than any insult. She put her hand through the bars, palm open. Felix released the gate key with one hand and gripped her fingers. They were cold. I know, she said. I know you're not. Adrian watched their joined hands through the iron. Something moved across his face, not suspicion now, but recognition of a world that had existed inside his house without his permission and without his care. Verity had not merely been lonely. Felix had not merely been dutiful. They had been keeping each other human in the spaces Adrian had left unattended. Lady Maud stepped closer to Adrian. Surely you will not permit a distressed boy to overturn necessary caution. Her Grace was leaving for her own comfort. Verity looked at him then. Not pleading. Waiting. The horses stamped behind her. The carriage lantern swayed in the wind. Rain darkened the shoulders of Adrian's coat, but he did not seem to notice. Felix, he said at last, unlock the gate. Verity's chest tightened. Felix went white. No, Adrian's voice dropped. Not to let the carriage out. To let me through. The boy hesitated. Then he turned the key. The lock gave with a heavy click that seemed to run all the way back to Harrowmere Hall. Adrian opened the gate just wide enough to step inside the small gravel turnout between the carriage and the ironwork. He did not touch Verity. He did not reach for Felix. He stood between them and the house, and for the first time that morning his authority faced the right direction. Her Grace is not leaving. Lady Maud inhaled. Adrian. Enough. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The word cut through rain, rank, and habit. The carriage will return to the house. No one will remove Her Grace from Harrowmere by my order or anyone else's until I have examined every hand that touched that letter. Verity heard the gate porter exhale. She heard Agnes begin to cry quietly behind the carriage. She heard Felix whisper, I knew it. Adrian's eyes met hers. Verity. Her name came differently this time. Not softer, exactly. Stripped. You will return inside. She withdrew her hand from Felix's and stood very still. No, the answer stunned him more than anger would have. You cannot remain in the rain. I can return to the house, she said. But not to the chamber from which I was accused. Not as a wife under watch. Not as a woman waiting to be pardoned for a sin she did not commit. Lady Maud said, this is absurd. Verity did not look at her. The dower wing has rooms enough. Agnes will stay with me. Mrs. Pike will be sent for. And if His Grace wishes to investigate, he may begin with the spare key Master Felix found and with the Eastgate ledger. Adrian's gaze sharpened. The ledger? You said no one saw you that night. Perhaps someone made certain no record survived. For the first time, uncertainty touched him openly. Not weakness. Worse. The dawning knowledge that his judgment might have served another person's lie. He turned to the porter. Thomas Gale, you will bring the Eastgate ledger to my study within the hour. You will speak to no one first. Yes, Your Grace. Mr. Pritchard, Adrian continued without looking back, Master Felix is not to be punished. He is to be dried, warmed, and brought to the morning room with his breakfast. Felix clutched the key against his chest. May I stay with Her Grace? Lady Maud said, absolutely not. Adrian looked at Verity. He did not command. He asked with his silence, and that small restraint mattered because it cost him. Verity nodded once. For a few minutes. Felix ran through the gate and threw his arms around her waist with careful force, as if he feared hurting her and losing her in the same breath. Verity bent her head over him. She did not weep. Not there. Not before Lady Maud. Not before the servants who had watched her disgrace and now watched its first fracture. Adrian saw the effort. His face tightened with something that was not pride and not yet repentance, but could become either. The carriage turns back, he ordered. Then, quieter, to Verity alone, you have my word that this will be examined. She looked at the forged house, the wet drive, the gate still open behind her, and the boy shivering in her arms. Your word sent me here. Adrian absorbed the blow without defense. Then I must begin with less than my word. Verity lifted her chin. In her pocket, her own key lay beside Mrs. Pike's letter, two small truths against a great lie. You may investigate your house, your grace, she said. You no longer command my trust. The gate remained open between them, but neither of them crossed first. The return to Harrowmere was quieter than the departure, which made it more terrible. No one called it a reversal. No one dared. The same carriage that had carried Verity toward disgrace rolled back up the east drive with its wheels dark from rain, and the same servants who had watched her leave now stood in the entrance hall with eyes lowered too quickly to be innocent. Felix kept close to her side, one cold hand curled in the fabric of her cloak until Agnes wrapped him in a dry woolen shawl and led him toward the morning room. Lady Maud entered behind them with her face composed, but her silence had changed. It no longer held authority. It held calculation. Adrian stood in the center of the hall and looked at the staircase as though it had become a witness against him. Only an hour ago, Verity had descended those polished steps as a woman condemned by the house. Now she stood at their foot, not restored, not safe, but no longer removed. That difference was narrow. It was everything. Your rooms are being prepared, Adrian said. The Duchess's chamber has already been kept warm. Verity did not move. The old brass key lay in her pocket with Mrs. Pike's letter, and its weight reminded her that returning to a house was not the same as being welcomed home. I will not sleep there. Adrian's gaze came to her face. It is your chamber. It is the room from which a letter was supposedly found beneath my pillow. It is the room another person entered without my knowledge. Until I know who had access to it, it is not mine. A faint murmur stirred among the servants and vanished when Adrian turned his head. He looked back at her with the pale control of a man forcing himself not to answer too quickly. Where would you prefer to go? The question surprised her. It surprised Lady Maud more. Verity saw the older woman's gloved fingers tighten around the handle of her reticule. The dower wing, Verity said. It has not been used since your grandmother's death, but the rooms are dry enough. Agnes will stay with me. Mrs. Vale may send linens, but she is not to arrange them without Agnes present. If Mrs. Pike comes, she will be brought to me there. Lady Maud stepped forward. The dower wing is unsuitable for her grace. It is distant from the main stair and inconvenient for attendants. Then inconvenience will be a novelty, Verity said. Cruelty has been very convenient here. Felix, halfway down the passage, turned back at the sound of her voice. Adrian saw him. He saw the servants too, fixed in that awful discipline that passed for loyalty in great houses. When he spoke, his voice carried through the hall. Her grace will have the dower wing. Mrs. Vale, you will send linens, coal, and a warming pan at once. No one enters those rooms without her grace's permission. The housekeeper curtsied. Yes, your grace. Lady Maud smiled with wounded patience. You are encouraging disorder to soothe hysteria. Adrian looked at her then, fully. Choose your next word with care. The hall went still. Lady Maud's smile did not break, but something beneath it recoiled. I meant only that the morning has distressed us all. Verity did not thank him. Gratitude would have been too easy for him and too costly for her. Instead, she turned toward the east corridor, where dustier carpets and colder rooms waited, and walked there under the eyes of the house she had not yet decided to forgive. The dower wing smelled faintly of closed shutters, lavender sachets, and old fires. Agnes moved quickly from half to wardrobe to window, making practical order out of neglect. Felix was allowed to sit by the small fire for 10 minutes with a cup of hot milk, his wet shoes replaced by slippers borrowed from a footman's younger brother. He held the spare gate key on his lap, as if someone might snatch it away. Verity sat opposite him, wrapped in a shawl, while Adrian stood near the door because she had not invited him deeper into the room. That, too, he noticed. Felix, Adrian said, his tone less ducal than uncertain, you did a brave thing. But you must never run from your tutor without telling someone. Felix looked into his cup. If I told Mr. Pritchard, he would have told Aunt Maud. Then you should have told me. The child lifted his eyes. They were too clear for comfort. You were sending her away. Adrian did not answer. The silence left a mark. Verity saw it land where no accusation could have reached. Adrian turned the spare key in his hand after Felix surrendered it at Verity's request. Where did you find this? In the little press near the pantry stairs. Behind the candle stubs. Who showed you the press? Felix hesitated. No one. I hide things there sometimes. Agnes gave a tiny cough and looked at the fire. Verity almost smiled despite herself. Children found the weak points in houses better than any solicitor. Adrian's expression sharpened, but not with anger. What things? String. A marble. A ribbon her grace gave me from a parcel. Not stolen things. I know, Verity said softly. Felix looked relieved. Adrian closed his fingers around the key. You said Lady Maud smelled of violets. Yes. And her glove was torn. Felix touched the side of one finger. Here. There was a little thread hanging. Did she see you? The boy's face changed. I don't think so. But afterward, she came to the nursery and asked why my candle was burned down. Verity's hand tightened around her shawl. Adrian looked toward the corridor, where Lady Maud's influence seemed to linger even without her body. Go with Agnes now, Verity said gently. Eat something warm. You have done enough for one morning. Felix slid from his chair, then paused beside her. You won't leave while I'm gone. Not without telling you. Promise? I promise. He looked at Adrian. You won't send her away. Adrian's voice came low. No, Felix studied him with the solemn suspicion of a child who had learned that adults could be wrong. You said that like a duke. Say it like my uncle. Adrian's face tightened. For one instant, Verity thought he might rebuke him. Instead, he lowered himself enough to meet the boy's eyes. I won't send her away, Felix. Not again. Not while this remains unanswered. It was not enough. But it was the first sentence that sounded like a man instead of a title. After Felix left with Agnes, Verity and Adrian were alone in the open doorway, separated by a threshold he did not cross. Rain tapped softly against the window. Somewhere below, the machinery of a great house resumed with nervous precision. I have sent for Haldane from York, Adrian said. He will arrive by evening if the roads are passable. A solicitor is useful for paper, Verity replied. He cannot measure trust. No, Adrian looked at the faded carpet between them. But he can tell me whose hand shaped the lie. And if that hand belongs to someone you have trusted for years, then I will have trusted poorly. Verity wanted the answer to comfort her. It did not. A wound did not close because the knife had begun to regret itself. I will also send for Mrs. Pike, he said. With your permission. That stopped her. You are asking. I am learning that I should have asked sooner. The words were plain. No flourish. No plea for forgiveness tucked inside them. For that reason, she believed them more than she wished to. Send for her, Verity said. But she comes to me first. Yes. He reached toward the pocket of his coat and removed the forged letter. He did not offer it to her. He held it like something contaminated. I should have known. Yes. The answer struck the room cleanly. Adrian accepted it. I remembered the East Gate when you spoke of it. I remembered the rain. I remembered your hand giving me the key. His voice roughened at the edge, then steadied. But I saw the ledger. I saw the letter. I saw scandal before I saw you. Verity looked away first, because the truth in that hurt more than any denial. That is what frightens me. A knock came before he could answer. Thomas Gale, the gate porter, stood in the corridor with his cap crushed in both hands and a leather-bound ledger tucked beneath one arm. His weathered face had the grey look of a man who wished to be anywhere else. Your Grace. You asked for the Eastgate book. Adrian took it, then seemed to reconsider the place. He turned to Verity. May I open it here? Her brows lifted. You wish the accused to watch the evidence. I wish my wife to see what is being used in her life. She gave one small nod. Adrian set the ledger on the writing table and opened to the entries from 10 weeks earlier. The pages smelled of damp leather and ink. Thomas stood stiffly by the door. Adrian turned one page, then another. His hand stopped. Verity saw the absence before she understood it. The binding showed a narrow, ragged edge where a page had been cut close and carefully. Not torn in haste. Removed. Adrian's face became very still. Who has access to this ledger? Myself, Your Grace, Thomas said. Mr. Bell the steward, sometimes Mrs. Vale if deliveries are disputed, and he swallowed. And Lady Maud, when she checks household movements. When did you last see the missing page? I cannot say, Your Grace. I had no cause to look back until today. Verity stepped closer to the table. The night His Grace came through the east gate would have been recorded there. Thomas nodded miserably. If I opened it, Your Grace, I wrote it. I always write it. Adrian looked down at the ragged edge, and the silence that followed was no longer empty. It had shape. It had teeth. Thank you, Gale, he said. Speak of this to no one until Mr. Haldane arrives. Yes, Your Grace. The porter bowed and left. Adrian closed the ledger with care. Verity watched his hand remain upon it, as if pressure could restore the missing page. Someone erased you, she said. Adrian looked at her. No. Someone erased the truth that would have protected you. It was the nearest he had come to understanding. It was still not forgiveness. From beyond the door, Lady Maud's voice sounded in the corridor, soft and precise. Is Master Felix resting? Poor child. He has always been so easily confused by affection. Verity went cold. Adrian turned toward the sound, and for the first time since his return, the expression on his face was not doubt, not command, and not wounded pride. It was warning. Lady Maud did not enter the dower wing. She stopped just outside its threshold as if the older carpet might stain her shoes, and that small refusal told Verity more than any speech. Adrian stood with one hand still resting on the closed gate ledger. The ragged edge of the missing page seemed to remain in the room, though the book itself had shut. Beyond the doorway, Lady Maud's voice carried with practiced concern. I only ask whether Master Felix is calm. After such an exhibition at the gate, the child will require steadiness, not indulgence. Adrian walked to the door before Verity could answer. He did not raise his voice. Felix will be seen by his tutor after he has eaten. Until then, he will not be questioned by anyone. Lady Maud's brows lifted. Anyone. Anyone. The word left no room for interpretation. For the first time since Verity had come to Harrowmere as a bride, Lady Maud looked not offended but measured. She was weighing a new arrangement of power and deciding where to place her next hand. Very well, she said. I shall see that the household is not further unsettled. Her gaze slipped past him to Verity. Though uncertainty does travel faster than any carriage. By noon, Verity learned how true that was. The first calling card arrived on a silver tray before luncheon, brought by a footman whose face had been trained into blankness and whose ears had not been. Lady Ardley had called, though she had not stepped inside. Beneath her name, in a hand as thin as a needle, she had written, with sincere concern for her Grace's health. A second card came 20 minutes later from Mrs. Elphinstone of Larkwell Manor, then another from Lady Penrose, then two from women who had never troubled themselves to visit Verity unless Adrian was expected at dinner. Each card carried some polished variation of concern. Each one asked the same question without asking it. Was the Duchess ill, disgraced, abandoned, or hidden? Verity sat in the dower sitting room with the cards spread upon a small table between herself and Agnes. The fire had finally taken. The curtains had been opened. Dust still clung to the carved arms of the chairs, but the room had begun to breathe again, as neglected things sometimes did when someone chose them. Agnes stood stiffly beside the tray. Shall I burn them, Your Grace? Verity almost laughed. No. That would give them more importance than they deserve. Shall I answer them? Not yet. Verity touched the top card with one finger. Let concern grow tired from waiting. Agnes's mouth twitched, then settled. Lady Maud has asked Mrs. Vale whether a note should be sent saying Your Grace is too delicate to receive visitors. Verity looked up. Too delicate. Those were the words. How useful weakness is when someone else gets to define it. Before Agnes could reply, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Not Adrian's. These were quicker, lighter, and then checked by nerves. Felix appeared in the doorway holding a slice of bread and jam on a napkin, his tutor hovering several feet behind him with the expression of a man who had been ordered not to interfere and did not know what to do with his hands. Felix looked from the calling cards to Verity. "Are they angry with you?" Verity held out her hand. "No. They are curious. Curious people often dress themselves as concerned people because it looks kinder." Felix came to her side. "Aunt Maud says curious people become dangerous if they aren't given a proper story. Aunt Maud believes stories belong to whoever speaks first. Is that true?" Verity looked toward the window, where the East Drive curved out of sight. "Sometimes. But not always." Felix climbed onto the chair opposite her, forgetting the manners that usually kept him poised like a small gentleman. "I didn't mean to make things worse." The child's face had gone pinched around the mouth. In it, Verity saw the cost of adult schemes paid in a currency no child should carry. "You did not make anything worse. But if I had kept quiet, she wouldn't be angry." "Felix." She waited until he looked at her. "When a person is angry because you told the truth, the fault is not in the truth." His eyes shone. "Even if it hurts people. Truth can hurt. Lies poison." He considered that with terrible seriousness. "Did I poison anyone?" "No, my dear." She reached across the table and covered his hand. "You opened a window." He looked at their joined hands, then at the cards. "Will they send you away again?" Verity felt the room tilt toward that question, toward the answer he needed and the answer she could honestly give. "Not without my knowing why. Not without my speaking." Felix swallowed. "And not without me locking the gate." The sweetness of it pierced her. She wanted to gather him close, but he was a boy being taught manhood in a house that confused restraint with safety, so she only squeezed his hand. "You must promise me something. Anything. No more standing in the rain." He looked disappointed. "Even for justice?" "Especially for justice." A knock interrupted them. Agnes went to the door and returned with a small folded note. "From the entrance hall, Your Grace. His Grace asks whether you will receive him here." Verity looked at the note, then at the cards. Adrian had asked again. That mattered. It did not heal. It mattered. "Tell His Grace he may come." Felix straightened as though he expected a trial. Adrian entered a moment later, dressed now in a dark coat. The travel dust brushed away, though nothing could brush the morning from his face. His gaze touched the calling cards first, then Felix, then Verity. "I have ordered that no reply be sent in your name without your approval," he said. Lady Maud's phrasing lingered behind that sentence. Verity heard it and knew he meant her to hear it. "How generous," she said. A duchess permitted to approve her own voice. Pain crossed his face. It did not ask pity. "I deserved that." Felix looked between them, fascinated and uneasy. Adrian turned to him. "Mr. Pritchard is waiting." The boy's shoulders tightened. Verity gave him a small nod. "Go. I will see you before dinner." Felix slid from the chair and stopped beside Adrian. "You won't let anyone say she is too delicate, will you?" Adrian looked down at him. "No, because she isn't." "I know." Felix hesitated, then left with the tutor, his bread and jam forgotten on the napkin. When the door closed, the quiet changed. Adrian walked no farther than the center of the room. Lady Maud proposed a notice to the county. "Agnes told me. She said it would protect you from gossip until the matter is examined. It would protect the house from my face." Adrian accepted the blow with a single breath. "I refused." Verity studied him. "In private?" No, that word was stronger. In the entrance hall, before Mrs. Vale, Bell, and two footmen who were pretending not to listen. "I said Her Grace remains Duchess of Norchester, and no caller, relation, or servant is to imply otherwise." Verity turned her eyes to the cards because looking at him was suddenly more difficult. "That will anger her." "Yes. It will also make people wonder what you are defending." "Let them." She looked back. Adrian's jaw was set, but not with pride alone. There was anger there, disciplined and dangerous, aimed outward at last. "I am not defending a convenience," he said. "I am defending my wife." The words might once have undone her. This morning, they only opened a door onto all the hours when he had not defended her. "You were my husband in the hall as well." His face stilled. "Yes." "You stood before the servants and believed paper more quickly than me." "Yes." "Do not make this easier by saying the right thing now." He lowered his gaze. "I will not." Silence held them, heavy but cleaner than before. At last Verity reached into the pocket of her gown and withdrew Mrs. Pike's letter. She did not give it to him. She unfolded it enough to see the careful hand, and the sight of it steadied her. "When I wrote to Mrs. Pike, she tied my note in the old Selborne manner," she said. "Blue thread around the packet. My mother did the same when sending household remedies, because she distrusted loose papers." Adrian watched her closely. "You remember that?" "I remember because the thread snagged on the edge of my writing box. Agnes had to cut it loose." "Was the thread still on the packet when the reply came?" Verity paused. She saw the morning again. The napkin. The letter. The wax. Her fear had fixed on the words, not the wrapping. Yet now an absence stood out. "No," she said slowly. "There was no thread." Adrian's expression sharpened. "Someone handled it before it reached you. Or someone removed the thread because it proved which letter was real." Outside the room, a servant passed too quickly. The floorboard gave one small betraying creak. Adrian turned toward the sound, but the corridor was empty when Agnes opened the door. Verity folded Mrs. Pike's letter again, more carefully this time. "Lady Maud saw the envelope on my desk. Later, my blotter had been moved. Now a forged letter appears under my pillow. And the gate ledger is cut." Adrian's voice had gone quiet in the way that made men in Parliament stop speaking. "Haldane will be here by evening. A solicitor cannot restore what was said before Felix." "No," Adrian said. "But I can prevent more from being said in your absence." Verity lifted one calling card. "They have already begun. Then I will receive the next callers myself." She looked at him then, "Truly?" "As Duke." "If necessary." He paused. "As the man who should have done so before, if I can manage it." Another carriage sounded faintly on the front drive, wheels over wet gravel, society arriving in silk and concern. Adrian looked toward the hall, then back at Verity. For the first time, he did not appear to be asking whether she would obey, nor whether she would forgive. He seemed to be asking where she wanted him to stand. Verity placed the calling card back upon the tray. "Do not tell them I am delicate." "What shall I tell them?" She rose, slowly enough to hide the wave of faintness that passed through her. His hand moved an inch, then stopped. Good. He was learning. "Tell them," she said, "that the Duchess of Norchester is at home." Adrian bowed his head once, not as a duke receiving instruction, but as a husband receiving a duty. He left the dower wing, and a few minutes later his voice carried from the entrance hall, cool, unmistakable, and public. "Her Grace is not hidden, Lady Ardleigh. She is resting by choice. You may leave your card, and you may also leave any rumour you brought with it at my door." In the dower sitting room, Agnes pressed both hands to her mouth. Verity sat again, one palm against the hidden flutter of her own uncertain hope. For the first time that day, the house whispered against someone else. By late afternoon, Harrowmere had divided itself into rooms that spoke and rooms that listened. In the entrance hall, Adrian received callers with the precise courtesy of a man placing each word like a lock upon a door. In the dower wing, Verity sat by the revived fire with Mrs. Pike's letter folded beneath her hand and felt the house waiting for her to become either proof or ruin. Rain had thinned to a silver mist over the windows, but the east drive remained dark, the gravel rutted by the carriage that had almost carried her away. Agnes had brought tea, broth, and dry toast, then pretended not to notice that Verity could not swallow more than a few bites. Every sound from the corridor seemed to approach with accusation. Footsteps. A door closing. A whisper cut short. Yet no one entered without permission. That change should have comforted her. Instead, it reminded her how little had been required to make dignity possible, and how long no one had done it. Near 5 o'clock, Adrian asked to see her. The request came in writing, carried by Agnes on a small salver, and Verity read the note twice. "May I speak with you in the dower sitting room, with Agnes present if you wish?" A proper sentence. A careful one. A sentence that knew it had lost the right to command. Verity looked toward the window where the grey day pressed close to the glass. "Tell His Grace he may come. Agnes will remain near the door." Adrian entered minutes later, not as he had entered the hall that morning, all authority and cold damage, but more quietly. His coat was dark, his face drawn, his gloves removed. In one hand, he carried the Eastgate ledger. In the other, the forged letter, folded inside a clean sheet as though even touching it directly had become distasteful. "Mr. Haldane has not yet arrived," he said. "The road from York is slower than I hoped. Roads often are when one needs truth quickly." His mouth tightened. "Yes." He placed the ledger on a small table but did not sit. "I sent a groom to Larkwell for Mrs. Pike. I told him to bring her here in the closed carriage and to say only that her Grace requires her attendance. Thank you for not dressing it as your command. I considered it." The honesty surprised her. He looked at the fire rather than at her. "Then I thought of you asking whether a duchess was permitted to approve her own voice." Verity did not answer. He deserved the silence, and to his credit, he did not try to fill it. At last he unfolded a copy of the household movement record made from the ledger before its page had been cut. Bell kept monthly summaries for the steward's accounts. He swears this one was copied before the page disappeared. It says no carriage came through Eastgate that night. Your horse did not have a carriage. No, Adrian said. It says no horse either. Verity felt the old key in her pocket, though she did not touch it. Then it lies neatly. Too neatly. He looked at her then. Tell me about that night. A pulse moved in her throat. You remember it? I remember pieces. The road. The rain. Your lamp in the window. His voice lowered. Your hand on the latch when you opened the garden door. Agnes, near the door, became intensely interested in the tea tray. Verity kept her gaze steady. You arrived after the house had gone to bed. You said Parliament had become intolerable and Lady Maud's letters more so. She had written 3 times in 1 week about Felix's lessons, the tenant roof at Eastmoor, and your failure to host Lady Penrose. My failure. Her word. But not one you contradicted then. No, that admission came quicker now. It did not heal, but it did not hide. Verity folded her hands in her lap. You had mud on your boots. You apologized for it, which startled me more than the hour. You asked whether I still kept the old gate key. I told you someone should have a way out. For the first time, something like pain passed openly across his face. I remember. You stayed in that chair. She nodded toward the worn wing chair beside the fire. Not this room. My sitting room. You would not let me send for anyone because you said the house would make a ceremony out of your exhaustion. I said that. You said worse of Lord Casterby. A faint, unwilling breath almost became a laugh, then died. He deserved it. Most likely. The room softened for 1 second around the memory. Then the present returned, hard and waiting. At dawn, you left through the east gate, Verity continued. You locked it behind you and passed the key back through the bars. I kept it on my writing table. Adrian's eyes moved to her pocket, as if he knew exactly where it rested now. I rode north to meet Whitcomb near Ripon. I did not go back to London until the following day. Can anyone confirm that? Whitcomb can confirm the morning meeting. Not where I spent the night. Then Lady Maud chose her gap well. He flinched at the name, though only slightly. I do not yet know it was Lady Maud. Verity looked at him for a long moment. No. You know your aunt entered my chamber at night, that Felix saw paper in her shawl, that the ledger page is missing, that a spare key lay hidden near the pantry stairs, and that a forged letter appeared precisely when my private letter from Mrs. Pike came into the house. You do not yet know. How disciplined of you. The words were sharper than she intended. They were also true. Adrian accepted them as if each one had been earned. I am trying not to condemn by instinct again. You did not hesitate when the instinct condemned me. No, he said. I did not. That struck deeper than a defense would have. Verity turned her face toward the fire because her composure had limits, and she would not spend them cheaply. Adrian moved one step nearer, then stopped when Agnes lifted her eyes. He noticed. He stopped fully. Verity, he said, and her name was careful in his mouth. I saw scandal before I saw you. I saw a threat to the succession, to the house, to a child not yet born and a child already under my care. I saw everything I was trained to guard. I did not see the woman I had wounded by doubting her. That is not an excuse. It is the truth of my failure. The fire snapped. Outside, a rook called from the wet lawn. Verity breathed slowly until the ache in her chest became something she could speak around. Believing me now is not a gift. It is what you owed me first. I know. Do you? I am beginning to. The answer was not grand enough to impress. That was why it unsettled her. Before she could respond, a knock sounded. Mrs. Vale entered with a curtsy too deep to be natural and announced that Lady Maud requested a word with His Grace concerning the County Charity Assembly. Adrian's expression cooled. The assembly is in 3 days. Her ladyship says the invitations are already accepted, Your Grace, and the parish school fund depends upon the subscriptions. Verity understood at once. A public gathering. County families. A duchess under suspicion. A room in which concern could become judgment before the soup course. Adrian understood a breath later, and his face hardened. Tell Lady Maud the assembly will proceed only if Her Grace wishes it. Mrs. Vale looked briefly as though the floor had shifted. Yes, Your Grace. After she left, Verity stared into the fire. If I do not appear, they will call me hidden. If I appear, they will call me shameless. Then I will cancel it. And they will call me the woman who cost the parish its subscriptions. Adrian's hand closed at his side. There is no clean road through this. There rarely is for women. Men notice when mud touches their boots. We are expected to smile while sinking. He looked at her with a grief that seemed new to him because it was not about himself. What do you want? The question entered the room softly and changed its shape. Verity thought of the hall, the carriage, Felix behind the gate, Lady Maud's lavender smile, and the small life within her that had already been used as evidence before being welcomed as hope. I want Mrs. Pike brought safely. I want Mr. Haldane to examine the letter and the ledger. I want Felix protected from questions he is too young to bear. And I want the assembly watched, not cancelled. Adrian's gaze sharpened. You intend to attend. I intend not to disappear. For a moment, he looked as if he would argue. Then he bowed his head. Then I will stand beside you. No, she said. His eyes lifted. No. You may stand near me. I will decide whether you stand beside me. The distinction landed. He bowed again, slower this time. As you wish. Another knock came before either could say more. A groom had returned from Larkwell. Mrs. Pike would come at first light, but she had sent a verbal message ahead. The packet Her Grace had sent was tied in blue thread when it left Larkwell. Verity closed her eyes once. Adrian went utterly still. The missing thread had become more than memory. It had become proof of interference. At the door, Agnes whispered, Your Grace, there is more. The groom had also seen Lady Maud's maid leaving a note at Lady Penrose's carriage on the North Road. Adrian's face did not change, but the air around him did. Then the assembly is not merely a risk, he said. It is a stage. Verity opened her eyes. In the firelight, the old room looked less like a refuge and more like a place where a woman might gather herself before battle. Then we must learn who wrote the first line. Outside, the rain stopped. Somewhere in the main house, Lady Maud's bell rang once, sharp and impatient, calling a servant to carry another secret. By the afternoon of the charity assembly, Harrowmere had polished itself into respectability so bright it almost hid the rot beneath. The great assembly rooms in Larkwell stood less than 4 miles from the estate, a long pale building beside the parish green where county families gathered to fund schools, exchange gossip, and decide who among them deserved kindness only after reputation had approved it. Verity arrived in a pearl-grey gown chosen for neither mourning nor triumph, with Agnes behind her, Mrs. Pike safely lodged in the rectory under the rector's protection, and Mr. Haldon's preliminary report folded inside Adrian's coat. The solicitor had reached Harrowmere late the previous evening, tired from the road and grave after examining the forged letter. He could not yet prove the hand, but he had said enough to harden Adrian's face. The paper was too fine for Captain Roland Fane's usual correspondence. The violet scent was not accidental. The phrasing was intimate in the wrong way, careless with a familiarity the captain had never been granted. None of it was enough to silence a room. It was enough to make one dangerous. Adrian stepped down first and turned toward the carriage door. He offered his hand. Verity looked at it for one measured breath, then accepted, not because she needed help, but because every face at the assembly room windows needed to see that she chose the gesture rather than received it as pardon. His fingers closed around hers with restraint. He did not hold too tightly. He did not let go too soon. "If you wish to leave at any moment," he said quietly, "we leave." "No," Verity answered. "If I leave, it will be because I have finished, not because they have begun." His eyes moved over her face. "Then I will follow your lead." She almost told him not to say beautiful things while wounds were still open. Instead, she withdrew her hand and walked toward the doors. The room inside was warm with candles, damp wool, perfume, and curiosity. Ladies stood in clusters beside subscription tables. Gentlemen bowed over ledgers and spoke of charity with the solemnity of men who enjoyed being seen generous. A small quartet tuned near the far wall, though no one was listening. Conversation thinned the moment Verity entered. Not stopped. That would have been honest. It thinned, sharpened, and turned into whispers that wore smiles. Lady Maud stood near the rector's wife with Lady Penrose at her side, both dressed in soft colours that made their cruelty look like concern. Felix had not been brought. That had been Verity's demand, and Adrian had honoured it, though Lady Maud had called his absence suspicious in the same tone another woman might use to praise the weather. Lady Penrose curtsied first. "Your Grace, how relieved we are to see you well enough to attend." "How kind," Verity said. "I have discovered that concern is very strengthening when offered plainly." Lady Penrose blinked. Lady Maud's smile remained perfect. "We were all anxious after hearing you had taken to the dower wing." "Rooms do not disgrace a woman," Verity replied. "Only the reason she is forced into them." A faint stir passed through the nearest ladies. Adrian moved to stand near her left shoulder. Near, not in front. Verity felt the difference like the warmth of a candle held far enough not to burn. The rector's wife approached with the subscription book, nervous but sincere. Verity signed for 20 guineas from her private allowance, then added another 10 for books, because children who learn to read might one day learn to question the stories adults handed them. That small act steadied her. It reminded her that she was not only an accused wife. She was still a woman capable of choosing where mercy went. For nearly 20 minutes, society pretended not to devour her. Then Lady Maud's ally chose the knife. Mrs. Elphinstone, widow of Larkwell Manor and collector of every rumour within a day's ride, lifted her voice just as the room gathered near the refreshment table. "How admirable that Her Grace supports children's education at such a delicate time. One hears children are a subject very near her heart." The silence that followed was not accidental. Verity set down her cup. Adrian's hand moved slightly at his side, then stopped. He was waiting. "Good." Mrs. Elphinstone continued, all bright innocence. "Forgive me. Perhaps I speak out of turn. It is only that certain letters have a way of troubling even the best houses, and a lady's friends naturally worry when names are linked without clarity." Lady Penrose murmured, "My dear, perhaps this is not the place." That was the place, of course. That was why she said it. Verity looked across the room at Lady Maud. The older woman's face showed distressed surprise, but her eyes were watchful. Waiting for Verity to tremble. Waiting for Adrian to thunder. Waiting for either reaction to become proof of guilt. "Names," Verity said calmly. How interesting. Which names? Mrs. Elphinstone coloured, but the appetite of the room pushed her on. Only that Captain Fane's name has been mentioned. I am sure improperly. Captain Roland Fane? Verity asked. A few heads turned more sharply. Adrian's gaze fixed on her profile, but he said nothing. Mrs. Elphinstone looked uncertain now. Yes. I believe so. Then whoever mentioned him knows him poorly. Verity's voice remained level. Captain Fane never addressed me by my Christian name. Not once. He asked my permission to call me Your Grace even in a private dinner party of 12, because he had been raised by a mother who considered manners a form of moral discipline. If a letter exists using the words My Dearest Verity, then it was written by someone who understood scandal better than etiquette. The room went still. Not whispering still. Listening still. Mrs. Elphinstone's mouth opened, then closed. Lady Penrose looked quickly toward Lady Maud. That quick look mattered. Verity stored it away like a thread caught on a nail. Lady Maud gave a small, pained sigh. My dear, no one wishes to examine painful private matters here. Verity turned to her. Then why were they brought here? The question landed cleanly. The rector's wife lowered her eyes. A gentleman near the window coughed into his hand and looked away. Lady Maud stepped forward with a sorrowful composure that would have convinced anyone who wanted to be convinced. Because those who care for this family fear that silence may harm you further. Silence has never harmed me alone, Verity said. It has always required assistance. Adrian's breath changed beside her. She sensed him wanting to intervene. She also sensed him mastering the impulse. Lady Maud's smile thinned. You are distressed. That is understandable. No, Verity said. The word was soft, but it cut through the room. Do not call it distress when a woman answers. Several ladies looked down at their fans. Mrs. Elphinstone's face reddened. Adrian stepped forward then, only one pace. Her Grace will not be treated as a subject for amusement disguised as concern. The room stiffened beneath his rank. Any person who has evidence may bring it to me and Mr. Haldane. Any person who has only rumour may swallow it before it chokes them. The impropriety of the last phrase made two elderly ladies inhale as one. Verity almost smiled. Almost. Lady Maud's eyes flashed before she lowered them. Adrian, surely you do not mean to intimidate charitable guests. I mean to clarify boundaries. On behalf of Her Grace. Beside Her Grace, he said. The distinction moved through Verity before she could guard against it. It did not erase the hall. It did not open the locked chamber of trust. But it stood at the door and waited without forcing entry. Lady Maud saw the flicker in her face and hated it. Then perhaps Her Grace will reassure everyone herself that there is no reason for continued concern. Verity understood the trap. If she defended too much, she would seem desperate. If she said too little, rumour would fill the space. She placed one hand lightly on the subscription table, near the open book of names. I will say this once. I have not betrayed my marriage. I have not written to Captain Fane. I have not invited pity, and I will not accept suspicion as the price of being visible. If any person in this room believes a wife must be silent to be virtuous, then perhaps the parish school should begin with adult instruction. For one stunned second, no one breathed. Then the rector, gentle old Mr. Alder, closed the subscription book with deliberate care. The school would be honoured by Her Grace's continued patronage. It was not applause. It was better. It was one respectable man choosing not to let the room pretend she had fallen. Others followed slowly, uneasily, because courage in society often needed permission before it could look like principle. Lady Penrose asked after the books. A young mother promised a donation of slates. Mrs. Elphinstone retreated toward the lemonade bowl. Lady Maud remained very still. Verity felt the cost of standing only after the room released her. Her knees weakened slightly, and Adrian saw it at once. He offered his arm without touching her. He asked. Yes, she said, because denial would be vanity and she had no strength left to waste on that. He led her to a side alcove near the open terrace doors, where cool air moved over her face. The music had begun at last, thin and polite behind them. "You should not have had to do that," Adrian said. "No," she looked out at the wet garden lamps beyond the glass. "But I did. You were magnificent. Do not make me into a statue because you are ashamed that I had to stand." He absorbed it with a wince. "Then I will say it plainly. You were right. About the letter. About all of it." Before she could answer, his gaze shifted over her shoulder. Lady Maud stood across the room speaking to a footman from Harrowmere, her fan hiding her mouth. The footman looked frightened. Adrian's eyes hardened. A moment later, the young man slipped away toward the back corridor. Verity followed the movement, and the chill that touched her had nothing to do with the terrace air. "She is not finished," she said. Adrian looked back at the crowded room where smiles had resumed their places over sharpened teeth. "No," he said. "She has only discovered that public cruelty must become private again." From the far doorway, a groom in Harrowmere livery appeared, rain on his hat and alarm in his face. He searched the room until he found Adrian, then bowed too quickly. Whatever message he carried, Lady Maud saw it first, and for one bare instant, her expression was not concerned at all. It was satisfied. The groom crossed the assembly room as though every polished floorboard might accuse him of panic. Adrian met him near the terrace doors before the young man could reach Verity, but the message was already in his face. Rain darkened the brim of his hat. His gloves were muddy. He had ridden hard from Harrowmere, and every curious eye in the room turned toward him as hunger turns toward a table. "Your Grace," he said, breathless, "Master Felix has been asking for her Grace and would not settle." Lady Maud thought it best he be removed to North Lodge for quiet, but he became distressed when the carriage was brought. Verity's hand tightened around the back of the chair beside her. "Removed?" Adrian's head turned toward Lady Maud across the room. She was watching them over the rim of her fan with that same satisfied stillness. "Who ordered the carriage?" "Her ladyship said it was by household necessity, Your Grace. She said the boy must be kept from talk." The groom swallowed. "Mr. Pritchard refused to force the matter without your word." Adrian's expression hardened into command so quickly that Verity felt the old fear of it before she could stop herself. "The boy is not to be touched until I return." The groom bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." "Wait." Adrian glanced back at the room, at the ladies pretending not to listen, at Lady Maud, at the gossip already dressing itself in silk. Then his jaw set. "No. Have the carriage prepared for North Lodge. I will write the order myself. He will go with Mr. Pritchard, a footman, and his nurse. No one else." Verity turned to him slowly. "You are sending him away." Adrian looked at her, and there was urgency in him now, the fierce, narrow kind that mistook speed for wisdom. Away from this. Away from her reach. Without asking him. He is 7. He is also the only person in this house who spoke when adults would not. His voice lowered. "And that is why he is in danger of being used." "By whom?" Verity asked. "Because from where I stand, everyone keeps deciding what protects him except the woman he ran into the rain to defend." His eyes flashed. "You think I do not know that?" "I think you know it and are still doing it." The words landed between them with more force than either expected. Adrian looked as if she had struck the exact bruise he had tried to cover. If Lady Maud reaches him again, she will press him until he doubts what he saw. Then stand between them. That is what I am doing. "No," Verity said. "You are moving him like a piece on a board." The quartet faltered. A few nearby guests looked away too late. Lady Maud stepped toward them, her fan folded now, her expression grieved and public. "Surely her Grace does not object to a child being spared further distress." "I object," Verity said, "to distress being used as a curtain." Adrian held up one hand, not to silence her, but to stop Lady Maud from taking another step. "This is not for discussion in this room." "Of course," Lady Maud murmured. "The room has heard enough already." Her eyes moved to Verity's middle for one swift, poisonous instant, then back to Adrian. "Do as you think best, dear boy." Dear boy. The phrase softened him in the room's hearing and insulted him in private. Adrian's mouth tightened. He took a card from his pocket, wrote the order with a pencil borrowed from the subscription table, and handed it to the groom. Directly to North Lodge. Warm rooms. No visitors without my permission. Mistress Lane is to remain with him. Mr. Pritchard will write to me upon arrival. The groom left at once. Verity watched the doors close behind him and felt something inside her close too. Adrian turned back to her. I will come to the lodge myself after seeing you safely to Harrowmere. You have not seen me safely anywhere by deciding for me. His face changed. Verity. Do not call it protection when no one is permitted to choose. He went still. That sentence did what anger could not. It showed him the shape of his mistake while he was still making it. For one breath, Verity hoped he would call the groom back. He did not. He looked toward the Rain Street windows, toward the house that waited, toward the public room that would devour any hesitation, and chose control again because control had always been praised in him as strength. We will leave, he said. The air here has turned foul. It did not turn foul on its own. She walked past him without taking his arm. The journey back to Harrowmere was made in a silence that had corners. Agnes sat opposite Verity, hands folded tightly over her reticule. Adrian rode beside the carriage rather than inside it, perhaps from propriety, perhaps because he knew she did not want the closeness of his regret. By the time they reached the estate, evening had drawn over the lawns. Lamps burned in the lower windows. The east gate stood open now, watched by Thomas Gale as if it had become a sacred wound. Verity looked for Felix in the entrance hall and found no one. That absence made the house larger and colder than before. Lady Maud was already there, arranging her shawl by the fire as if she had never left the assembly room. Master Felix is safely on his way, she said. You must be relieved, Adrian. Verity turned to him. You see? She is. Adrian's eyes cut to Lady Maud. You will not visit North Lodge. Lady Maud blinked. I had no intention of upsetting him. You will not write to him. You will not send a servant. You will not ask after him except through me. Her mouth curved faintly. How severe. One might think I had placed the boy behind the gate myself. Verity heard it then. Not confession. Pleasure. Lady Maud had not needed to win the argument. She had only needed Adrian to separate Felix from the one adult he trusted, and Adrian had done it under the banner of protection. Before anyone could speak, a maid hurried in with a folded paper. From North Lodge, Your Grace. One of the stable boys brought it ahead. Adrian took it. Verity watched his face as he read. The first line did not change him. The second did. What is it? She asked. He handed the paper to her. It was not from Mr. Pritchard. The hand was uneven, careful, and childish in the way children became careful when an adult watched too closely. I was confused this morning. I ought not to have spoken. Her Grace was kind to me, and I wanted to help her. I am sorry for making trouble. Verity read it once. Then again. The words blurred, not with tears, but with a fury so cold it steadied her. He did not write this freely. Adrian took the page back and looked at the cramped letters. No, Lady Maud sighed. Children recant when emotion fades. It is not wicked to be relieved. Verity faced her. You are relieved too soon. My dear, you mistake me. No, Verity said. I have been mistaking quiet for weakness. That was my error. Lady Maud's smile thinned. Be careful. A woman in your position should not appear ungrateful for the Duke's patience. Adrian spoke before Verity could answer. Her position is Duchess of Norchester. Lady Maud inclined her head. For now, that is the very delicacy under discussion. Silence struck the hall. Even Adrian seemed to understand that something had been said too plainly to be unsaid. Verity placed one hand over the place where hope and fear lived together inside her. She looked at the staircase, the corridor to the dower wing, the servants pretending not to hear, and then at Adrian. I am going to North Lodge. No, he said at once. Then he stopped, because he heard himself. Verity did not move. Say it again, Your Grace, if you mean to. His face tightened. I meant it is late. You are tired. You should not travel again tonight. I will not go alone. Agnes will come. So will a groom and a footman. If you wish to ride behind the carriage, you may. But I am going. Lady Maud's voice turned smooth. How dramatic. Verity looked at her. How frightened you must be to call every act of courage dramatic. Adrian stared at the false apology in his hand. The paper trembled once, not from fear but from anger held under rank. I will go with you. No, Verity said. You may follow. I go because Felix needs someone who will ask him what happened before deciding what is best. She turned to Agnes. My cloak. The warmer one. And send for the carriage. Not His Grace's order. Mine. Agnes curtsied with a fierce little light in her eyes. Yes, Your Grace. For the first time since the morning of the letter, Verity saw Lady Maud lose colour. It was quick, almost invisible. It was enough. The house had watched Verity be sent away. Now it watched her choose the road herself. The carriage Verity ordered did not wait for a duke's seal. It came to the front steps under Agnes's direction, with lamps lit, rugs warmed, and a groom riding ahead as propriety demanded. Mrs. Lane, an elderly companion who had once served the late Duchess and had more sense than fear, was fetched from her rooms with a bonnet, a cloak, and no questions beyond, North Lodge or Larkwell first, Your Grace. That quiet obedience steadied Verity more than sympathy would have done. She stepped into the carriage under the eyes of the household, not as a wife being removed, but as the Duchess of Norchester giving an order in her own house. Adrian stood at the foot of the steps with the false apology from Felix folded in one hand. His horse had already been brought around. He looked as if every lesson ever beaten into his pride had met a wall and found it would not move. The road to North Lodge is rough after rain, he said. Then ride carefully, Verity replied. I did not say you should not go. You almost did. Yes. The admission came with no defense, which made it harder to resent and easier to remember. Lady Maud appeared in the doorway behind him, wrapped in pale wool, her face composed for the servants. This is unnecessary strain. If Her Grace is truly concerned for the child, she would not race over wet roads at dusk. Verity paused with one hand on the carriage door. Which child, Lady Maud? The older woman's expression barely shifted. Surely both. How generous of you to remember the one you accused only this morning. A footman looked down at once. Adrian's gaze went to Lady Maud, but Verity did not wait for him to speak. That had been the old pattern. Hurt, silence, then hope that a powerful man would interpret pain correctly. She climbed into the carriage herself. Agnes settled beside her. Mrs. Lane took the opposite seat, calm as a church bell. The door closed. The wheels turned. For the second time that day, Verity passed beneath Harrowmere's front lamps with the old brass key in her pocket and a decision in her bones. This time, the gate was open before she reached it. Thomas Gale stood beside the pillar, hat in hand, his weathered face shadowed by rain and remorse. As the carriage slowed, he stepped near enough to speak through the open window. Your Grace, I was told not to say anything before His Grace asked, but there is something you should know. Verity leaned forward. Say it now. 10 weeks ago, when His Grace came through East Gate, I logged him in. I remember because he rode alone and told me not to wake the house. His voice dropped. The next morning, Lady Maud asked to see the gate book. Said she was checking coal deliveries. That was the last I saw the page whole. Agnes drew in a sharp breath. Verity held herself still. Will you tell Mr. Haldane that? Yes, Your Grace. I should have said it sooner. Fear makes many people late, Verity said. Do not let it make you absent. Thomas bowed, and the carriage rolled on into the wet evening. Adrian rode a few yards behind, close enough to guard, far enough not to command. Verity saw him only when the road curved and the carriage lamp caught the line of his dark coat, but his presence no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a question following her. Larkwell village lay 3 miles from Harrowmere, clustered around a small stone church and rectory whose windows glowed amber against the rain. Verity had meant to go first to North Lodge, but Thomas's words changed the order of things. Felix needed comfort. Truth needed witnesses. Mrs. Pike might hold both. The rector's wife opened the rectory door herself, startled but not unkind, and Mrs. Pike came down the narrow stairs still tying her cap. She was a sturdy woman with silver hair, clear eyes, and the practical tenderness of one who had seen many women frightened by bodies that society discussed only when inheritance was at stake. "Your Grace," she said, taking Verity's chilled hands between both of hers. "I was coming at first light. I could not wait." Mrs. Pike looked past her to Agnes, then to Mrs. Lane, and understood enough not to ask in the hall. In the rectory parlour, with a fire burning low and rain tapping at the panes, Verity told her only what was necessary. The forged letter. The missing thread. The accusation made before servants. Mrs. Pike's mouth thinned, not with shock, but with the older, harder anger of a woman unsurprised by injustice. "The packet you sent me was tied in blue thread when it arrived," she said. "I tied my reply the same way before giving it to the Harrowmere messenger. I remember because the knot was stubborn, and I joked to my niece that duchesses deserved better string." She went to a small drawer and removed a folded scrap of blue thread and a note written in her own hand. "I kept the cut end from your first packet because it had your mother's way of tying it. Sentimental, perhaps, but useful now." Verity stared at the thread as if it were a ribbon pulled from the dark. So small a thing. So nearly nothing. Yet it proved that the letter had travelled marked and had reached Harrowmere changed. "Will you come to Harrowmere when called?" Verity asked. "I will come tonight if needed. You may be questioned. I have been questioned by frightened fathers, proud husbands, and women in more pain than any of them could imagine. A solicitor will not trouble me." Verity almost smiled. The feeling came fragile and unfamiliar. "Thank you." Mrs. Pike touched her wrist. "You must eat when you return. Hope is no nourishment, and neither is fury." From the doorway, Adrian's voice came quietly. "May I enter?" Verity had not heard him approach. He stood beyond the parlour threshold, rein on his shoulders, hat in hand. He had asked. Again. Mrs. Pike glanced from him to Verity and waited to see who held authority in the room. Verity said, "You may." Adrian stepped inside, but not far. "Thomas Gale has spoken to me. He will give his statement to Haldane. I also sent to North Lodge. Felix is there, but the note was written under supervision. Pritchard's second message makes that plain." His eyes moved to Mrs. Pike's thread. "Is that what I think it is?" "A small truth," Verity said. "Small truths are sometimes the only ones allowed to pass unnoticed." He looked at her as if the sentence had entered him and found no comfortable place to rest. "Then we gather them." The road to North Lodge narrowed beyond Larkwell, running between hedges that brushed the carriage sides with wet leaves. Verity kept Mrs. Pike's folded note and the blue thread in her reticule, beside the old brass key. 3 small objects. 3 refusals to disappear. When they arrived, the lodge showed lamplight in only 2 windows. Mr. Pritchard opened the door before the footman knocked twice, his thin face strained with relief. "Your Grace. I am glad you came. I did not know how to refuse without making it worse." "Where is Felix?" Verity asked. "In the small sitting room. Mistress Lane is with him. Lady Maud's maid came with instructions, though her ladyship did not come herself." Adrian's voice sharpened behind her. "Instructions from whom?" Pritchard swallowed. "Written under her ladyship's hand, Your Grace." The boy was to write that he had been confused and that affection for her Grace had made him fanciful. Verity did not wait. She moved past him into the sitting room, where Felix sat curled in an armchair too large for him, his hair untidy, his face pale above a blanket. Mistress Lane sat nearby with knitting in her lap and defiance in her posture. Felix saw Verity and scrambled to his feet. "I didn't mean it," he burst out. "I wrote it because Miss Barlow said if I didn't, they would send you farther away, and Uncle Adrian would think I was wicked." Verity crossed the room and knelt carefully before him, ignoring the faint dizziness that rose and passed. "Look at me, Felix. Did you lie at the gate?" "No, did you lie in the letter?" His mouth trembled. "Yes." Then now we know which words were forced. He stared at her, desperate to believe absolution could be that simple. You're not angry? Not with you. Adrian stood in the doorway, silent and white with contained anger. Felix looked at him and shrank a little. The movement wounded everyone who saw it. Adrian lowered himself to one knee as well, leaving distance between them. Felix, I made a mistake when I sent you here without asking what you needed. I thought I was protecting you. I was protecting my fear instead. The boy blinked. A duke's allowed to say they were wrong. This one is required to. Felix's lip quivered, then steadied. He reached into the pocket of his small coat and drew out a bit of pale torn thread. I kept this. It caught on the schoolroom screen when Aunt Maud took off her glove. I thought maybe grown-ups need things they can see. Verity held out her palm. Felix placed the thread there. Not blue. Pale lavender, from a torn glove. The room fell utterly still. Adrian looked at Verity's open hand, then at the child, then down as if shame had become too heavy to lift. Verity closed her fingers around the thread. Yes, she said softly. Sometimes they do. By the time the party returned to Harrowmere, the house had lost its right to pretend innocence. The old brass key, the blue thread from Mrs. Pike's packet, the torn lavender thread from Lady Maud's glove, the false apology in Felix's cramped hand, and Thomas Gale's promise to speak had gathered in Verity's reticule with the strange weight of small things that refused to stay small. Felix rode back in the carriage between Verity and Mrs. Lane, wrapped in a blanket, his head nodding against Verity's sleeve as exhaustion overcame fear. Adrian rode beside the carriage again, his dark figure appearing and vanishing beyond the rain-spotted glass. He had not asked to take command. He had not ordered Felix into another room. He had not told Verity what must happen next. That restraint should have pleased her. Instead, it revealed the terrible distance between an action and repair. A man could do one thing correctly and still stand miles from trust. When the carriage passed through the east gate, Thomas Gale held his lantern high. His face was grave, and he bowed not to Adrian first, but to Verity. The gesture was small enough to be denied and large enough to be understood. In the entrance hall, Lady Maud waited beneath the great portrait of Adrian's grandfather, where the Wickliffe ancestors stared down in oils and judgment. She took in Felix asleep against Verity, Adrian mud-streaked and silent, Agnes carrying the reticule, and Mrs. Lane with her chin set like a fortress. What a procession, Lady Maud said. One might think North Lodge had become a battlefield. Verity looked at her without slowing. No. A battlefield is where both sides admit there is a war. Lady Maud's eyes cooled. You are overtired. You rely on that word too often. Adrian stepped beside Verity, not before her. Felix will sleep in the nursery tonight with Mrs. Lane and Agnes taking turns nearby. No other person is to enter. You exclude me from the child I have helped raise. Tonight, yes. Lady Maud drew herself up. For his welfare, this family must be spared further scenes. I have already asked Reverend Alder, Sir Edmund Vale, and Mr. Haldane to attend tomorrow. The matter should be settled formally before more damage is done. Adrian's gaze sharpened. You sent for Sir Edmund. A justice of the peace brings steadiness. Unless truth fears steadiness. Verity understood. Lady Maud had not retreated. She had moved the fight into a room where rank, age, and performance might do what whispers had failed to finish. How thoughtful, Verity said. You prepare a table before knowing who will be served upon it. Lady Maud smiled. My dear, I only hope you will be wise enough not to mistake public discomfort for vindication. Felix stirred at Verity's side. His eyes opened just enough to find her face. Don't let her make me right again, he whispered. The entire hall heard. Lady Maud's expression did not change, but the servants did. Mrs. Vale looked down. Bell the steward looked toward the door. Adrian's hand closed once at his side, then opened. No one will make you write anything, he said. Not tonight. Not ever for a lie. Felix relaxed against Verity's arm. She did not look at Adrian, because if she did, she might soften before she was ready, and softness offered too early was another way women were taught to disappear. In the dour sitting room, Mr. Haldane arrived near midnight with spectacles low on his nose and a leather case of papers under one arm. He was a compact man of cautious habits and unromantic virtues, which made Verity trust him more than charm would have done. Mrs. Pike sat beside the fire with tea she had not touched. Thomas Gale stood near the door, cap in hand. Felix had been carried to the nursery, and Mrs. Lane had gone with him like a sentry in bombazine. Adrian remained by the mantel, his face cut in firelight, while Verity sat at the small table and opened her reticule. One by one, she placed the objects down. The brass key. The blue thread. The lavender glove thread. The force note. Mrs. Pike's written account. "This is not a trial," Mr. Haldane said carefully. "No," Verity replied. "It is the beginning of one truth refusing to be buried." The solicitor glanced at Adrian, perhaps expecting correction. None came. Mr. Haldane adjusted his spectacles and began. Mrs. Pike confirmed that Verity's original packet had been tied in blue thread and that her reply left Larkwell tied the same way. Thomas Gale swore he had opened Eastgate for his Grace 10 weeks before, after the long clock, and that Lady Maud had asked to inspect the gate ledger the next morning. Mr. Haldane then produced the missing piece none of them expected so soon. Mrs. Vale, after much hesitation, surrendered Lady Maud's household account book. She said she had noticed the binding sit oddly after her ladyship reviewed it this afternoon. He opened a packet. Inside lay a narrow page, folded twice, its edge ragged where it had once joined the ledger. Adrian went very still. Verity felt the room lean toward the paper. Mr. Haldane read the entry aloud. Eastgate opened for His Grace, 11:45 at night. Horse only. No servants roused by order of His Grace. T.E. Gale. The silence afterward was not empty. It was full of all the words Adrian had not said in the hall when Verity needed him. He looked at the page, then at her, and for once the Duke of Norchester seemed to have no rank large enough to hide inside. "You were telling the truth," he said. "I was telling the truth before paper permitted you to believe it." He flinched. "Yes." Mr. Haldane cleared his throat with the mercy of a practical man. "There is also the matter of ink. The forged letter carries a violet residue on the fold. Lady Maud uses violet ink for private correspondence. That is not conclusive alone, but when joined with the child's testimony regarding scent and glove thread, it becomes significant." Adrian's voice was low. "Enough? Enough to confront. Enough to expose contradiction. Enough that a public accusation against Her Grace becomes dangerous to the accuser." Verity looked at the little objects on the table. They had been carried by women, a child, a servant, and a midwife. Not one of them would have outweighed a duke alone. Together, they had begun to bend the house back toward truth. Adrian stepped closer, then stopped at the edge of the table. "Verity, I can settle this quietly before morning. I can remove Lady Maud from household authority, send her to Bath, and issue a statement that the rumor was false." "A statement," Verity said. "Neatly worded. Respectable. Clean. It would spare you another room of eyes. It would spare you one." He took the blow in silence. She rose slowly, and Agnes, who had been waiting near the screen, came forward at once, but Verity steadied herself with one hand on the chair. "I was shamed before servants. Whispered over before county families. My child was made suspect before being welcomed. Felix was used, then pressured to call himself confused. If truth is spoken quietly now, the lie will remain louder." Adrian's face tightened with a grief that no longer tried to defend itself. "Then say what you require." "Require?" "No," he corrected himself at once. "What do you choose?" The change mattered. It did not heal everything. It mattered. Verity looked from Mrs. Pike to Thomas Gale, then to Mr. Haldane. "Tomorrow, in the great drawing-room, before every person Lady Maud has summoned, the proof will be laid out. I will speak first. You will not rescue me from my own voice." Adrian bowed his head. "I will not. You will not protect your aunt's dignity at the expense of mine. No, and when the truth is clear, you will not say merely that I was innocent." Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "You will say that you were wrong." The fire snapped. Mrs. Pike looked down at her cup. Thomas Gale stared at his cap. Mr. Haldane became very interested in arranging papers. Adrian looked at Verity as if she had asked for the one thing all his life had trained him never to give in public. Then he said, "Yes." "Not quickly. Not easily. Honestly. I will say it." A knock came at the door before the silence could settle. Bell entered with a folded note, his face pale. "From Lady Maud, Your Grace. She says the family inquiry is set for 11 tomorrow. Reverend Alder and Sir Edmund have accepted. Lady Penrose and Mrs. Elphinstone have also been invited as witnesses to Her Grace's conduct at the assembly." Adrian took the note. Verity saw his expression change as he read the last line. "She asks that Her Grace prepare to sign a statement agreeing to temporary residence away from Harrowmere for the peace of the household." Verity reached for the old brass key and closed it in her palm. Its edges pressed into her skin, real and cold and certain. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we shall discuss whose peace this house has been protecting." At 11 o'clock the next morning, the great drawing room of Harrowmere Hall looked less like a family chamber than a room prepared to weigh a soul. Sunlight came through the tall windows in pale bars, touching gilt frames, carved chairs, and the long table Lady Maud had ordered placed before the hearth. She had chosen the arrangement carefully. Reverend Alder sat near the centre, his kind face troubled. Sir Edmund Vale, Justice of the Peace and a man fond of speaking as though every opinion had been stamped by law, occupied the chair beside him. Mr. Haldane sat with his leather case closed at his feet. Lady Penrose and Mrs. Elphinstone sat together beneath a portrait of the late Duke, their expressions composed into concern. Senior servants waited near the far wall because Lady Maud had insisted household peace required household witness. Mrs. Vale stood pale beside Bell the steward. Thomas Gale remained near the door, cap in hand, with the strained dignity of a man prepared to lose employment rather than truth. Felix was not in the room. Verity had insisted on that, and Adrian had agreed. The child had given enough of himself to adult cowardice. He waited in the morning room with Mrs. Lane, a fire, toast, and explicit permission to play with wooden soldiers if the house began whispering again. Verity entered last, not because she wished to be dramatic, but because Agnes needed 1 extra minute to fasten the grey silk gown over the faint sickness that had returned at dawn. The dress was simple. No jewels except her wedding ring. No ornament except the old brass key in her reticule and the knowledge that today she would not be carried by anyone else's mercy. Adrian stood when she entered. Then every other man rose because he had, and every woman looked to see whether Verity would falter beneath the attention. She did not. Adrian's chair was placed at the head of the table. He did not take it. He moved 1 place to the side and left the head empty, a silent refusal to let rank pretend it was the same as justice. Lady Maud noticed. Verity saw the flicker in her eyes. "This is an unfortunate necessity," Lady Maud began, before anyone had invited her to speak. "I hope we may proceed with delicacy. The reputation of this house, the welfare of Master Felix, and Her Grace's own comfort require resolution." "Comfort," Verity repeated, and the word was so quiet that several people leaned in to hear it. Lady Maud folded her hands. A woman in distress often resists the very measures intended to protect her. Adrian's gaze shifted toward Verity. He did not speak. He remembered. She felt the effort of his silence and acknowledged it only by not asking him to leave the room. Sir Edmund cleared his throat. "Your Grace, Lady Maud has placed before us a proposed statement. It suggests Her Grace might reside temporarily away from Harrowmere until certain questions are settled." "Which questions?" Verity asked. Sir Edmund blinked. "The questions concerning the letter, naturally." "Then let us speak naturally." "You mean the letter implying I betrayed my husband?" Lady Penrose's fan snapped open. Mrs. Elphinstone stared at her lap. Reverend Alder looked pained. Lady Maud closed her eyes briefly, as if wounded by plainness. "My dear Verity, no one wishes to expose private shame." "No," Verity said. "Several people wish to expose it at the charity assembly. Today I mean to expose the machinery beneath it." A murmur moved near the servants' wall and died. Sir Edmund looked to Adrian, expecting the Duke to moderate his wife. Adrian did not. "Her Grace requested that she speak first," he said. "She will." Lady Maud's mouth tightened. Of course. We must all be patient. Verity looked down the length of the room. She had once entered this drawing-room as a young bride with a bouquet in her hands and terror hidden beneath lace. She had learned where to sit, when to pour, when to let Lady Maud correct the placement of flowers and the tone of invitations. She had learned that a woman could be duchess and still be treated like furniture inherited with the house. Today the furniture spoke. Before any paper is signed, Verity said, I would like to understand how a forged letter was discovered so conveniently beneath my pillow after my private letter from Mrs. Pike entered the house. Lady Maud gave the smallest sigh. You assume forgery before proof. I assume nothing. I ask questions. Questions can be unkind. So can answers prepared too early. Mr. Haldon's mouth twitched, then became professional again. Verity turned to Mrs. Vale. Mrs. Vale, who first told you there was a letter beneath my pillow? The housekeeper startled. Her ladyship did, your grace. Lady Maud's face went still. Mrs. Vale is confused. Mrs. Vale's hands twisted once, then steadied at her waist. No, my lady. You told me to change her grace's linens and then said there might be a paper mislaid. I found none when I first looked. Later, you called me back and said it had been discovered. The room shifted. Not loudly. It shifted as a body shifts when a hidden injury is touched. Lady Maud leaned back with sad patience. Servants hear what fear tells them. Verity turned next to Lady Penrose. At the assembly, Mrs. Elphinstone mentioned Captain Fane's name. Who told her? Mrs. Elphinstone paled. Lady Penrose said quickly, we heard only concern. From whom? Verity asked. Gossip has no parent, Lady Penrose replied. It always has a midwife. Reverend Alder looked down, not quickly enough to hide the fact that he had nearly smiled. Verity turned back to Lady Maud. The forged letter used my Christian name. Captain Fane never did. He was tiresome but correct. Whoever wrote that letter understood scandal, not the etiquette between a cavalry officer and a duchess. Sir Edmund shifted in his chair. That is suggestive, not decisive. Agreed, Verity said. So let us continue. Lady Maud's eye sharpened. This is becoming theatrical. No. Theatre requires an audience that came to be entertained. This one was invited to judge me. Adrian's hand moved on the table. He did not touch her. He only placed it flat upon the polished wood, as if anchoring himself against the instinct to stand and burn the room down with rank. Verity took strength from the restraint rather than the power. Lady Maud, she said, how did you know the contents of the letter before it was supposedly found? For the first time, the older woman did not answer at once. It lasted only a heartbeat. It was enough. I was told, Lady Maud said. By whom? A maid. Which maid? Must servants be dragged through humiliation because her grace dislikes discomfort? Verity looked toward the servants near the wall. I was dragged through humiliation before servants yesterday morning. I survived being seen. Let truth do the same. Mrs. Vale covered her mouth. Belle stared at the carpet. Lady Maud's voice cooled. You are unwell. This condition makes you impulsive. The word condition passed through the room like a candle brought near powder. Adrian's head lifted. Reverend Alder looked sharply at Lady Maud. Sir Edmund's brows rose. Verity felt the heat rise to her face, but she did not look away. What condition? Lady Maud smiled with terrible delicacy. You have told us yourself that you are with child. Yes. Verity placed both hands on the table. And yesterday morning that child was treated as evidence against me. Today it is being used to call me unstable. Tomorrow, if I am silent, it will be used to remove me. How useful an unborn child becomes when a house values inheritance more than truth. Lady Maud's fan trembled once. You would make yourself a martyr. No, Verity said. I would make myself heard. The door at the far end opened before Lady Maud could reply. Agnes appeared, startled and breathless, with Mrs. Lane behind her. Between them stood Felix in his dark coat, pale but determined, one hand closed around something small. Adrian rose at once. "Felix." "I know you said I didn't have to come," Felix said. His voice shook, but he stepped forward. "But she said grown-ups need things they can see." No one asked whom he meant. Every eye followed him as he walked to the table. Lady Maud stood halfway. "Felix, darling, you must return to Mrs. Lane. Don't call me darling when you're frightened." The words struck harder because they were spoken by a child. Felix reached Verity's side and placed the old brass spare gate key on the polished table. It landed with a small sound. Metal against wood. Truth against performance. "I found this where Aunt Maud hides things," he said. "And I remember what I saw." The room went utterly still. Lady Maud looked at the key, then at Verity, and for one bare second her face lost every trace of sorrow. What remained was fear. The old brass key lay in the center of the table as if it had always belonged there, not in a pantry press, not in a frightened child's hand, not in Verity's pocket beside a letter that had nearly ruined her. For one suspended moment, no one spoke. The great drawing room, with its painted ancestors and polished mirrors, seemed to hold its breath around the small piece of metal. Felix stood beside Verity with his shoulders drawn tight and his chin lifted, and she saw that he was trembling only because courage had cost him something. Adrian moved first, but not toward Lady Maud. He came around the table and stopped behind Felix, close enough that the child knew he was not alone, far enough that no one could mistake support for control. "Felix," he said quietly, "you will tell only what you remember. If you wish to stop, you may stop." Lady Maud found her voice. "This is monstrous. You cannot put a child through questioning before strangers." Felix looked at her. "You did." The word struck the room cleanly. Reverend Alder closed his eyes for a moment. Mrs. Elphinstone's fan drooped in her lap. Sir Edmund Vale sat forward, no longer wearing the expression of a man indulging domestic emotion. Mr. Haldane opened his leather case and removed the folded forced apology. "Master Felix," he said, his tone gentle, "did you write this note freely?" Felix glanced at Verity. She nodded once. "No, sir. Miss Barlow said Aunt Maud wanted it. She said if I didn't write that I was confused, Her Grace would be sent farther away and Uncle Adrian would think I was wicked." Lady Maud's voice sharpened. "Miss Barlow is a maid of excitable temperament." "Then we shall ask her," Adrian said. "She is waiting outside with Mrs. Vale." The older woman's face changed again. It was quick. A flicker of calculation meeting a locked door. Mr. Haldane placed the note beside the key, then added a small twist of pale lavender thread, Felix's evidence from the schoolroom screen. "And this?" "It came from Aunt Maud's glove," Felix said. "I saw it hanging after she came out of Her Grace's chamber. She smelled of violet ink. I remember because it made me sneeze, and she told me a gentleman does not make animal noises." A sound almost like laughter moved through the servants and died under the gravity of the moment. Lady Maud rose. "I will not be condemned by nursery recollections." "Nor should anyone be," Mr. Haldane replied. "Which is why we have more than recollection." He unfolded Mrs. Pike's statement and set the blue thread beside it. Mrs. Pike stepped forward from near the wall, broad, calm, and unimpressed by titles. Her Grace's packet reached me tied in blue thread. My reply left Larkwell tied the same way. When it reached Her Grace, the thread was gone. Someone opened or handled it between village and chamber. "A midwife's guess," Lady Maud said. Mrs. Pike looked at her steadily. "A midwife learns the difference between guessing and witnessing, my lady. Families rarely enjoy the distinction." Verity heard Agnes take one proud breath behind her. Mr. Haldane next placed the torn ledger page on the table. The ragged edge matched the bound book Bell carried forward with shaking hands. "Thomas Gale," the solicitor said. Thomas stepped up, face weathered, voice rough but firm. "His Grace came through Eastgate 10 weeks ago, near midnight. I opened it myself. He ordered no one woken. I wrote it in the ledger." The next morning, Lady Maud asked to see the book. "For coal deliveries," Lady Maud said. "At the East Gate?" Adrian asked. The room turned toward him. Until then he had spoken little, each silence an offering to Verity's voice. Now his tone held the full weight of his rank, not to crush but to strip away pretense. You checked coal deliveries at a gate used for private rides, on the morning after I returned secretly, and later a page proving that return vanished. Lady Maud's chin lifted. You forget yourself. No, Adrian said. That has been the disease of this house. I remembered myself too well and forgot everyone else. Verity felt the words before she understood them. They changed the air. Lady Maud looked suddenly older. I protected the family. You protected your influence, Adrian said. You feared that if Verity carried my child, Felix would no longer be the expected heir. You feared the household would no longer circle your chair. I raised that boy. You used him. Her mask cracked. I secured him. Do you know what happens to orphan boys when new heirs are born? They become ornaments. Afterthoughts. Dependent on another woman's mercy. Felix stared at her, stricken. Verity put one hand lightly on his shoulder. Lady Maud saw it and turned her fury there. You think she loves you? She will have her own child soon enough. Felix's face went white. Verity spoke before Adrian could. Love is not an entailment, Lady Maud. It does not pass to one child by taking from another. Reverend Alder murmured, well said. Sir Edmund tapped one finger on the table. Lady Maud, did you place or direct the placement of the letter found in her Grace's chamber? I did what was necessary to delay disaster. That is not an answer, he said. Mr. Haldane unfolded the forged letter. The paper matches a stock kept in your private escritoire. The violet ink matches your correspondence. The phrasing repeats two expressions from letters you sent Lady Penrose last month. I have those letters here, surrendered voluntarily after she understood the seriousness of this matter. Lady Penrose looked as though she wished the carpet would open. Lady Maud turned on her. Coward. No, Verity said. Cowardice is letting a pregnant woman be sent from her home for a lie. The words landed with finality. Lady Maud's hands fell to her sides. She did not confess in tears. She was not that kind of woman. Instead, she looked at Adrian and spoke with bitter dignity. I did it for the house. Adrian's face hardened. Then the house rejects the gift. He turned to the room. Let every person here understand what I should have understood yesterday morning. Verity Wickliffe, Duchess of Norchester, is innocent of the accusation made against her. The child she carries is legitimate. The letter was contrived, the ledger altered, and the witness pressured. His voice roughened. He did not hide it. And I was wrong. I sent my wife toward exile without hearing her, and by doing so I gave a lie the authority of my name. The room was silent. Not because society had nothing to say, but because rank had finally been used to tell the truth against itself. Adrian turned to Verity. I cannot ask this room to restore what I broke. I can only begin before it. Let me earn the right to be your husband in truth. Verity looked at him across the table where the key, threads, letter, ledger page, and forced apology lay like fragments of a life pulled back from ruin. She did not rush to him. The old Verity might have mistaken public remorse for healing and offered forgiveness because everyone was watching. This Verity had learned that dignity sometimes required tenderness to wait. You may begin, she said. That is not the same as being finished. Adrian bowed his head. I know. Sir Edmund rose. Lady Maud, you will leave Harrowmere today for Bath under the supervision of your cousin Mrs. Ainsworth. Your involvement with Master Felix's care ends at once. Mr. Haldane will prepare the necessary papers. Any further circulation of this accusation will be treated as malicious defamation within the county. Lady Maud's face emptied. Mrs. Elphinstone whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Reverend Alder stood and bowed to Verity. Your Grace, the parish owes you an apology for allowing charity to be made a stage for cruelty. One by one, the witnesses lowered their eyes, not in pity now, but in recognition. Verity picked up the old brass key. Felix looked at her. Does that mean she can't send you away? No, Verity said softly. No one can send me from myself. Then she looked at Adrian. "Let us begin where this house tried to end me." The key warmed in her palm as the great drawing room, which had once been arranged to judge her, opened a path to the door. 3 months later, Harrowmere Hall no longer whispered in corners when Verity entered a room. It did something stranger. It paused, adjusted itself, and waited to learn what she wished. That change had not come in a single grand morning, though society liked to pretend justice happened all at once when enough important people were present to witness it. It had come in smaller, steadier ways. Mrs. Vale no longer accepted household instructions from any hand but Verity's or Adrian's. Bell brought estate questions first to the Duchess's writing table if they touched tenants' wives, children, or parish obligations. Thomas Gale received a new ledger bound in red leather, and the East Gate was recorded with such careful honesty that even the stable boys joked no sparrow could pass without being entered properly. Lady Maud lived in Bath under the watch of her cousin Mrs. Ainsworth, who wrote once a month in a tone of exhausted duty. Her allowance had been reduced to comfort without influence. Her letters to Felix were held by Adrian until the boy was old enough to decide whether he wished to read them. He had not asked yet. Lady Penrose called twice with apologies dressed as invitations, and Mrs. Elphinstone sent a donation to the parish school large enough to expose guilt and small enough to preserve pride. Verity accepted the money for the children and declined the dinner. Some people mistook dignity for softness because it did not shout. Verity had learned to let them be mistaken from a distance. By late summer, the nursery in the east wing was nearly ready. Its windows looked toward the lawns instead of the front drive, because Verity had said no child of hers should wake each morning to the road by which its mother had almost been sent away. Adrian had not argued. He had stood beside her in the empty room, listened to her reasons, and then ordered the cradle moved himself. That had become his new habit. He listened first. Sometimes the listening cost him. Verity could see it in the tightening of his mouth when a lifetime of command rose to his tongue and stopped there. But he stopped it. Again and again. Trust did not return like sunlight breaking through cloud. It returned like a garden after winter, one stubborn green thing at a time. One afternoon, when the nursery curtains were being measured and Felix was arguing with Agnes over whether a rocking horse required a name before the child arrived, Adrian came to the doorway with a small leather case in his hand. Verity sat near the window, one palm resting against the curve of her growing child, her breath quiet but not effortless. Mrs. Pike had told her that health required less pride and more broth, advice Verity accepted only because Mrs. Pike delivered it like military strategy. Adrian stopped at the threshold. He still did that when a room was hers. "May I come in?" he asked. Felix looked up from the rocking horse. "You always ask now." Adrian's eyes moved to him. "Yes. Even when it's your house. Especially then." Felix considered this with the solemnity he gave all adult corrections. "Good." Verity's lips softened. "You may come in." Adrian crossed the room and placed the leather case on the small table beside her. "The household seal," he said. Verity looked at him. The seal of the Duchess of Norchester had been kept for years in Lady Maud's writing desk, though no one had ever named the impropriety aloud. It carried the authority to approve household correspondence, charitable accounts, invitations, and certain estate matters that touched the domestic governance of Harrowmere. Lady Maud had used it like a gate. "It should have been yours from the day you came here," Adrian said. "I cannot give those years back. I can stop stealing from the ones ahead." Verity opened the case. The silver seal lay on dark velvet, cleaned and newly engraved with her initials beside the ducal crest. Not beneath it. Beside it. She traced the edge with one finger. "You had it altered?" "Yes. People will notice. They are welcome to practice." Felix grinned. Agnes hid a smile in the curtain fabric. Verity looked up at Adrian. There were still mornings when she remembered the hall and felt the old coldness return. There were still evenings when he reached for her hand and stopped, waiting to see whether welcome lived there. Yet there were also moments like this, when repentance did not plead to be admired. It simply repaired what it could reach. "Thank you," she said. Not forgiveness entire. Not absolution. Something true. Adrian bowed his head as though it meant more than a declaration before Parliament. "There is another matter," he said. A carriage is waiting. Felix dropped the curtain cord. Are we going somewhere? Only to the east gate. The room stilled, but not with fear. Verity closed the leather case and rose slowly before Adrian could offer too much help. He offered his arm instead of his hands, and she chose to take it. That was the language they had been learning. Offer. Choice. Acceptance. Outside, the afternoon lay warm over Harrowmere. The lawn smelled of cut grass and late roses, though Verity had refused to let roses become the symbol of her survival simply because every sentimental caller seemed to expect it. The east gate stood open when they arrived, its ironwork black against the green lane beyond. Thomas Gale waited beside it with his red ledger under one arm, trying and failing to look as if he had not polished his boots for the occasion. Mrs. Vale, Belle, Agnes, Mrs. Lane, and several servants stood at a respectful distance. They had not been summoned to watch a spectacle. They had asked to be there. That difference mattered. Felix ran ahead, then stopped at the gate and turned back with the old brass key in both hands. Not the spare key from the pantry press. Verity's key. The one from the rainy night, the one she had carried through accusation, exile, and proof. Adrian had returned it to her after the drawing-room inquiry, and she had kept it in her desk until that morning. Now Felix held it as carefully as if it were a christening cup. "Do I open it or close it?" he asked. Verity looked at the gate. Once, it had marked the place where a carriage waited to carry her away under the authority of a lie. Once, a child had stood behind it and made the whole house answer for itself. Now the gate stood between the estate and the road, but it no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a choice with hinges. "Open it," she said. "But inward." Felix fitted the key into the lock and turned it with both hands. The mechanism gave its familiar heavy click. He pushed, and the gate moved toward Harrowmere, opening not to send anyone out, but to welcome them in. Thomas Gale entered the moment in his ledger with great ceremony. "Eastgate opened by Master Felix Wickliffe, in the presence of Her Grace," he said, and his voice shook only a little. Felix looked proud enough to burst. Then he ran back and caught Verity's free hand. "When the baby comes, can I show him the gate?" "Or her," Verity said. "Or her," Felix agreed at once. "And can I tell the story?" Adrian's grip on Verity's arm changed, barely. He did not interrupt. Verity looked down at the boy who had once believed truth needed metal proof to be heard. "You may tell it," she said. "But not as a story about being afraid." Felix frowned. "What should it be about?" Verity looked at Adrian then. He stood with uncovered remorse still living in him, but also with patience, and patience had become the first language of his love. "About coming home properly," she said. Adrian turned his face toward her. "Verity." He spoke her name quietly, not to claim her attention before others, but to ask for it. She gave it. "I once thought a house was mine because my title was written over the door," he said. "I was wrong. No house is mine if you are not safe within it." He lifted her hand and kissed the back of it, gently, in front of the servants, the child, the open gate, and the summer fields beyond. It was not a performance. It was a vow made where the old wound could hear it. Verity let her fingers remain in his. "Then keep making it safe," she said. "Every day." "Every day," he answered. Felix tugged impatiently at her other hand, already facing the house. "Mamma, come home." The word crossed the air before anyone could soften it. "Mamma." Verity felt Adrian go still beside her. She looked down at Felix, and the child's confidence wavered only after the word had escaped. "Is that all right?" he asked. Verity bent carefully and kissed his forehead. "Yes," she said. "It is all right." The old brass key rested warm in Felix's palm until he placed it in hers. Verity closed her fingers around it, not as a secret now, not as escape, but as belonging chosen with open eyes. Behind them, the east gate stood wide, opening inward. Ahead, Harrowmere waited, no longer the house that had tried to end her, but the home she had required to begin again.